First up, you didn't have to be a candidate this year to have an L on your forehead. The big losers included the vast majority of pundits, most of the pollsters, the exit polls, newspapers, editorial pages, Facebook, Twitter, and you might say the media as a whole. Call it, we got it wrong. Going into election night, there was a mass media assumption that Hillary Clinton would win.
That Trump is headed for a historic defeat.
Most analysts are saying that Hillary Clinton's going to win in a landslide.
He's going to lose by a landslide.
It's not that there was a vast conspiracy, more like a vast wasteland of data.
Clinton today is more likely to win in a landslide that would not only...
From botched polling to wishful thinking, like this New York Times piece suggesting an Hispanic surge would swamp Donald Trump, to the fundamental fact that most of the media felt Trump was unfit to be president based on things like this.
Grab him by the pussy.
They're rapists. We're going to build a wall, folks.
Call it a confirmation bias, the media telling each other what was going to happen. That combined with the fact that most of the elite media live in urban bubbles on the East and West Coast, and you've got a recipe for the media believing it knew better.
What does the Republican Party want to do that's not racist, that's not egregious, that's not suppressive?
That kind of rancor directed at Trump spilled over into editorial pages as well, with no credible American newspaper endorsing Trump. Not even conservative strongholds like the Arizona Republic, which endorsed Clinton.
This is where we stood coming into the night.
Even on election night, the media was slow to acknowledge the fact that the tide was turning.
Will the night end with the first woman president-elect?
It wasn't until the New York Times started showing its speedometer pinning towards Trump that the realization sunk in.
Probably is a strong sentiment about not having a woman president.
No doubt the journalistic hand-wringing has begun in earnest at many news outlets. Because even though the media may have had it right about Trump's fitness for office, they missed the part about what the voters thought. So, I heard your commentary this week, John, and I know the media isn't one mass, but when you look at the media as a whole and what happened over the course of the last year and a half, basically they were tracking wrong essentially on the polls. That model is old, it's broken. They weren't reaching the right kinds of people. I do believe that there's a lot of reaffirmation, as I said, or confirmation bias that goes along by, you're talking to each other on Twitter and Facebook and social media and in our own newsrooms, that a lot of reporters just don't get out there. And, even the New York Times, Dean Baquet admitted that, there was a lot of sort of dive bombing into some of these communities, but then you come right back out. And yeah, there was some great reporting, but it was flash reporting, and they didn't pick up on these deep trends. Yeah, they knew there was a trend. They knew Donald Trump was certainly getting the masses to follow, but it didn't have really the whole soul of it.
David Broder, the great Washington, he's no longer with us, right? Yeah, well, he's spinning in his grave then, because his kind of reporting, where you'd go and you'd spend weeks at a time, months over the course of a campaign in New Hampshire and other parts of flyover country, talking to people, knocking on doors, trying to get a handle on what voters' lives were like and what they were thinking. That was popular back then, not so much now. That's been replaced by obsession with the polls, and not just with the polls as some interesting numbers to look at, but to help us achieve the Holy Grail, predicting the outcome in advance. We have to know now. What? Yeah. How many times have we talked about that over the last year? Yeah. And that sunk too many people. When even David Gergen is diving overboard, come on, Mr. Play It Safe. Yeah. So I think that was really the problem. The pollsters, they obviously overrated Hillary Clinton's chances, but they were more or less within the margin of error for the most part. Some polls were wildly off. But it was the pundits and also, I'm sorry to say, journalists who got this disease who messed up the bed.
I agree with a lot of what you said, but there was also a different dynamic in this campaign, where when you went out and spoke to some of the voters, they did not want to admit that they were supporting Donald Trump. I know someone who clearly was a Donald Trump backer, but he never came out and said that, and still hasn't told me that he voted for Donald Trump. And so it's difficult to get, I think, good polling or get a good sense of what people are thinking if they aren't telling you the truth. And, you can't blame it completely on that, but I think that was a dynamic that maybe we haven't seen in other years.
Well, I think the problem here, and I agree with you completely, John,
The problem is that we are acting as though if the media had gotten it right, if we had made the right prediction, then we would be congratulating ourselves and saying, oh, the media did a great job. That's not the job that we were appointed to do. You think of the most consequential journalism of this campaign. The two stories that probably stand out the most are the New York Times revelation of Hillary Clinton's email server and the Washington Post revelation of the tape, the tape with Billy Bush. Those had nothing to do with who's going to win, who's going to lose. Those were a deep look at what they do, what they say, insight into their character. That was consequential journalism, not this obsession with the polls.
Well, I agree with you about the polls, and I read a really great piece by Alicia Shepard, former NPR ombudsman, about the media getting it wrong, and she interviewed Sopan Deb, who was a embed with CBS News, and she said what happened was that we used the polls as direction to how we would cover, instead of how she said the question is what would happen had there been no polls to direct us to where to cover. What would you do? How would you get the story? You would do it as you would any other story. You'd have to go to the people. You'd have to put pieces together. But you would not be directed by this data that seemed to suggest to you what the end was, and you were merely going, therefore, to report on what the end suggested. So there's that. The second thing I will say is I'm really curious, and I know somebody maybe should do an audit on what local media was saying versus the swoopers in, who that we all regard with, they're good. And when they come in, they usually get the job. But when you swoop in and swoop out, to your point, you miss a lot. What was local media saying, and maybe consistently, that national media did not pick up on, and we continued then to regurgitate?
Well, there was a lot of focus on the same things.
Yeah. And national media always swoops in and swoops out.
I get that.
By nature, that's what it is.
But
so you're able to come in and you work very quickly in determining what is going on and swoop back out. This was a different dynamic, I think.
And I also think that the news media really believed every time they made a revelation about one of Donald Trump's new things, whether it was the Billy Bush tape or calling the judge racist in the Trump University case or whatever it was, berating the family of the fallen Muslim soldier. Everybody in the news media thought that was it. That's it. It's the end of him. Not realizing the bigger picture that it didn't matter to virtually anybody.
That is absolutely right. And you hear an awful lot of postmortems along the idea of, the media did a terrible job because Trump won. I would suggest that the media did a terrible job in a lot of ways, but that nevertheless, people who voted for Trump knew exactly what they were voting for.
They knew about all those things.